You know, I know. I mean, absolutely. So, yeah. Well,
All right.
there we go. I will absolutely have to
Thank you,
see
dear
and
heart.
see you soon.
Thank you.
And thanks
Bless
for.
you.
Oh, no.
Hello. Alicia.
That's okay.
Yes.
You guys, I want to do this with Billy's.
Oh, God. No.
Make up for the other parts of the
I know. Well, I'm in the video, so right there. It's a second show. And also, that's me in the background. Not looking away.
When you smile, I want to smile. You smile with your whole face.
I don't think so. Not because of that. That's okay. We don't. We don't even really have enough time to show the video.
Much 90% of the bylaws.
Speaking of which, you're going to go and we're going to start.
Yeah. I can start now. I can start in 5 minutes.
All right, well,
Well,
give it a couple more minutes.
it's done. It's not done by committee, but by one or two people.
Right.
Well, the trouble is that the candidate is involved in these overseas forms. She has to back away before making a decision.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, now, we didn't get those bylaws questions answered. We could get this down.
Well, not so important
do some
to
sort of
be on time. Yeah.
amend it later.
Very important.
Because there, the basic thing is there, but we actually want the press to amend a couple of aspects. Leave it the way it is, back with it, like, let's get the appropriation first. So
And you're going to incorporate the nonprofit.
yeah. Which there's 2 steps to it. One is being recognized as the corporation in the state. And then you go to a much longer process, because there's a form to fill out with the IRS to get the tax exempt status. But the amount of work isn't really different, really. Just copying what you sent to the state.
Yeah.
But you put it in the mail and sit back and look at the calendar with the IRS.
I've done it.
I've done it. I have too. And it's really irritating because you're like 7 months, 8 months.
Oh, really? It's shorter than I.
No. Then you get a letter saying that there is something about your application that needs further processing.
Right.
They assign an agent to you, and then 4 or 5 or 6 months later, you get a notice as to what the actual issue was. And you find it was a simple thing to fix. If you had just called me 7 months ago, I could have told you. And then you get your stuff. But they're really slow in processing.
Yes, they are. Always have been.
The state is okay as far as.
Yeah.
Is this nonprofit size?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I did
done that before
Yeah.
too.
This is for the community land trust.
All right. Christian, I don't think we're going to get any more live ones.
I know. That's okay.
Do you want us to come closer?
If you wouldn't mind, I guess you don't have to. You
Okay.
don't have to move if you don't.
Okay, we'll be lazy.
People are still coming over for the other room.
You have been in touch with Justin to go to catch my answer. I thought I had the wrong number on
Gilman Square.
Where are you going?
No,
The reason why I asked that was because
oh, thank you. No, I'm going into Boston. I'm catching the bus that goes into Kendall.
okay.
And it was Greek in December last week, but the consulates have whatever reception. So I'm going over there with my brother, and Rick is going to meet us.
Does he live
Yes.
here now?
Yeah, he does. He lives in Natick.
Oh, okay.
He works in
Should
water
we start,
tower
or?
in the renovated arsenal.
Oh, okay.
We might still be wrangling people
Okay.
in the other room, which has food in it.
Mm.
So we'll still be eating
All right.
to go give share.
your slides, how are they all used? So for example, Somerville is 10% of it. Oh, there's Mark Tracy. Here's Chris's boss. Oh, you missed Mark Tracy.
I know.
He's an old buddy of mine.
Cool.
Some of them might figure I'm a traitor, but no, it's like this.
I wanted to try some sort of sure how they proceed together.
I was up.
Just one issue, one push, and you looked. That's the only thing, because that's the module that so that's what, so I've been trying to put this one.
Cool.
Who's different?
And I know, I don't remember what I was talking about, but I learned so we're trying to context.
Hey everybody. So I think I'm gonna get started. Thank you all for joining me today. This is actually a really nice number of people. So I'm excited that you're all here. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Christian Brandt. I am a community engagement coordinator at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I'm here to talk to you today about two things. So this is really two presentations smushed into one, and then we'll have some small group work later. So the first presentation is on some research that MAPC has done of the different master plans and other similar documents that the towns in our region have completed in the last 10 years. So I'll be going through that first, and then the second part will be an introduction to our regional plan, which is called Metro Common 2050, and we'll be going over some of our draft goals. And the local plans research was one of the parts that informed, one of the things that MAPC has done that informed the conclusions that are the goals that we're creating and working with for Metro Common. So I'm going to have questions about the master plan research at the end of the master plan part, and then we'll move into Metro Common. And then we're going to be going through this pretty quickly. So if you have lingering questions that are maybe more high level or might take a long time to answer, there are some sheets, little squares in front of you that are for writing questions on, and we have a question box in the back. So if you want me to answer them to you, if you write your email address or contact information on it, I or someone else at MAPC will make sure to get in touch with you about an explanation or an answer or whatever. Sound good? Cool. So this local plans review was completed by a team of planners at MAPC led by our principal planner, Josh Fiala. So I was not part of this research, so there's probably going to be some questions about this that I can't personally answer. But again, that is what those question sheets are for. So I'm going to first do a quick explanation of the process that we went through. So we started with prep. We looked through what types of plans were available, what places had master plans completed since May 2008. We tried to look for the most comprehensive snapshot of the municipal vision. So we weren't looking for plans that were really specific in nature. If a municipality didn't have a master plan, we were looking to see if they had another plan that was similarly comprehensive, but maybe a little bit more specific. So that helped us identify plans. We then reviewed them. We produced summaries for each plan. I can't really speak to a whole lot of this because I wasn't involved, but they were entered into a gigantic database on Excel and coded. So that was part of the compiling and synthesizing, and that really helped us look for patterns and commonalities between the priorities in each plan, and then we further looked at that by our different subregions, which I'll get into a little bit later. We have 8 subregions, so you can see those on the left. Somerville is part of our inner core subregion, so there's 20 municipalities in that subregion. There are 9 municipalities with no master plan, and 11 municipalities with a master plan. So I'm not going to read all of that off for you, but you can sort of see, for instance, the Minuteman Advisory Group, interlocal coordination, commonly referred to as MAGIC, is my favorite abbreviation. All 13 of them have a master plan. So it's pretty variable between the different regions that we work with. In total, of the municipalities that we work with, 77 of them have a master plan. We work with a total of 101. So here's a handy map. You can see the inner core region is outlined in red, or black, or whatever that is. I'm not sure how that's showing up for you guys. But so in that region, the yellow municipalities are the ones with master plans. So this is sort of a little bit more detail. I'm going to skip this.
Excuse me, can I ask, is this on your website?
I think it will be, but I'm not sure. That's a good question, actually.
Because I think this is really interesting, but I can't write all the notes down, so
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to keep up with it, to
I think
be
that
able to access it.
our intent is to put it on the website if it's not already.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So then we looked at communities that had a master plan completed prior to May 2008. So that's this. May 2008 is an important date to know because that is when we adopted our previous regional plan, which was called Metro Future. Some of you may be familiar with that. I'll get into a little bit more later about what that is. This is more detail, which I will also skip because I don't think that it's as relevant for what we're talking about today. So we obviously couldn't review every single one of those master plans. That was a little bit of a heavy lift. So we identified among those which plans were important and which ones, not important, but which ones would be the most helpful for us to look at in terms of their breadth, what they talked about, how recent they were, and so on. So that's these. We also tried to make sure that we were looking at plans from all of our 8 regions because the subregions obviously have very different realities in terms of planning, so we didn't want to just focus on doing this analysis with only plans from the inner core, for example. So the conclusions from this are based on all of the regions that we work with. Of course, there are some towns that don't have a master plan, so those towns couldn't be included. So you'll see that there's 42 plans total, and by subregion, it's not super evenly distributed. For example, these 2 areas have fewer master plans represented in this sample than we would like, but that's sort of the nature of this research, I suppose. So this is just a fun picture diagram of all the different master plans, what they look like. Cool. You obviously can't read this, but this is just to give you an idea of what our database looked like and what kind of information we were putting into it. It's pretty detailed. We made sure that it was being coded appropriately and had all the important information that we were looking for each plan summarized. So now the part that's really interesting, what did these plans actually say? So these are the top 20 local planning priorities across all the plans that we looked at. So you'll see that number 1 is improved multimodal connections. 94, the number next to that, indicates the number of rows of entries included for each priority. So there are 94 priorities, there are 94 occurrences of this specific priority. So this is really just telling you what the plan said. That's it. There's no sort of like deeper analysis on this page. The second one was preserve and manage open space, invest in facilities and property, and preserve history, efficiently deliver services, and onwards. I'm gonna break this out into a little bit more detail based on subregion. So some of these you might find surprising. I think this is, for me, it's surprising considering how significant the housing crisis is, that produced affordable housing is only number 7. But I also think that addressing traffic congestion is pretty surprising at 14. That seems like it might be higher.
Sorry.
Sure, multimodal connections is like the transportation option where there's multiple different kinds of transportation connected together, so biking, driving, taking the train, walking, so on and so forth. And transit, sorry, transit is included in multimodal. This is since 2008. So the plans that were included in the ultimate review were 2008, last 10 years. Right. So we broke them out by priority area. So you can see the 6 priorities here. One is equity of wealth and health, climate mitigation and resiliency, homes for all. I didn't create the titles for these. They are a little bit jargony, I suppose you could say. But inclusive growth and mobility, dynamic and representative government, and open topic, which is sort of the miscellaneous one. So those 20 priorities were, or 20 plus priorities were sorted into these different categories. And then, of course, ranked within each category. So under this category, the most commonly occurring priority was provide economic development resources. You might notice, and I'm sure you've noticed this with some of the regional plans that you've read, that doesn't, it's not entirely clear what provide economic development resources means. So that's not something that this research specifically addresses, because that's really specific to the plan. That could mean different things for different plans, for the different plans that it occurred in. But we did notice that as well, if you are seeing that and wondering what's going on. I'm going to fast forward through this, if that's okay with people. So I think this is one of the more interesting parts. So this will tell you how the subregions differed based on what their most common priorities were. So you'll see that in the inner core, improved multimodal connections was the #1 most common priority to occur. And there's a couple of others that also have that. So Metro West also said improved multimodal connections. North Suburban Planning Council also said improved multimodal connections. Invest in facilities is both the #1 in the Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination and also the South Shore Coalition. So these names are just the names for the different subregions that we use to manage all 101 towns. Preserve and manage open space is also the #1 for a couple. So there's some similarities here already, and we're sort of breaking it down into a little bit of a finer analysis. Interestingly, there's not a whole lot of housing. Anything relating to housing is really not, it's absent from a lot of this, which it surprised us when we did this research. It's surprised almost everybody who we've presented this to, but it is very interesting nonetheless. So that's sort of the end of that presentation. I know that we have some questions. I'm going to talk about this, and then can I come back to answer yours? Yeah. So MAPC is also involved in a couple of other regional-based processes and projects. One that is relevant to Somerville is called the Metro Mayors Coalition, and that's a coalition of these mayors, which generally corresponds to the inner core subregion that we operate. And they do a lot of things, but there are 3 specific areas where the mayors get together to talk about opportunities to collaborate and policy solutions to similar problems that are occurring in all of these municipalities. And those are housing, the opioid crisis, and climate change. So this is on the website. There's a lot of detail on MAPC's website about the Metro Mayors Coalition. So if you want a little bit more information, that's where I would go. I think we don't have quite enough time to really do a deep dive in Metro Mayors today. But it is an effort by MAPC to sort of bring together communities that are experiencing similar issues to think about ways that we can address those regionally. Another example came out of our Metro Future regional plan, which was, like I said, was completed in 2008. And that's called the MAPC Regional Indicators Project. So I'll go into this a little bit more, the Metro Future a little bit more later, but our regional plan had a lot of goals. There were 65, in fact, which was a little unwieldy, especially for an agency which at the time only had 35 staff. So it was very hard to measure following up, hard to accomplish, lots of moving parts. Wasn't the most strategic thing that MAPC has ever done. But in 2011, we launched the Regional Indicators Project, which was an attempt by MAPC to measure how the region was responding and to the issues that we were experiencing and what progress they were making towards the goals that we set. This is also a very detailed website. You could probably spend several hours combing through all of the data that's on it and all the information. If you're really interested in this, I also recommend that you look at this website because it is really fascinating. In particular, there is a report that we created, that we released in 2017 called The State of Equity, and that really summarizes all of the regional indicators that we are keeping track of on this website in relation to the equity in the region. So that's all I'm going to talk about this for. And I know you had a question, so I want to address that before we move on to the next part.
I just had a question about the data you mentioned.
Sure.
I know your comment of how you were surprised about housing.
Yeah.
And how that wasn't on the list. But then you mentioned, I just want to be clear on the dates. So were a lot of these plans 2008 and later, and do we know? Because there's a big difference between 10 years ago versus 5 years ago versus a year ago. And so while 10 years ago housing might not have been a priority, in the last 5 years and in the last year or two even, there's huge changes.
Right.
Elected officials are running on affordable housing platforms and new groups are forming. So where is the data?
The data is coming, so the data from this is coming from the plans that which I'll go back to that slide. So these are the 42 plans we included for review. These plans are plans that were completed since 2008. So it is even more surprising when you start to think about the date at which this research is 2008 to 2018. So it's hard for you to see because the screen is a little bit small, but on the sides next to it, there are dates for the plans and when they were adopted. So this includes, we have been updating this as towns and cities have been completing plans. So for example, we're currently working with Revere on Revere's master plan. It's not finished, so it's not in this, but we did just finish a master plan for Duxbury, and Duxbury was included in the analysis. So the first presentation that we gave of this research has changed slightly as we've included more recent plans. But yes, this is from 2008 to 2018.
And all of them look like they were later in that period.
Right, so all of these ones in the South Shore were 2019, 2019, 2008, 2014, 2015. So a lot of them are more recent, yeah. Yes?
The substance of what you compared. Did you do any methodological comparison in addition to, so you said you compared priorities? Were those just, I assume some plans mentioned a priority.
Yeah.
Other plans had probably 3 chapters that went into great detail.
Yeah.
Numerical, qualitative studies, etc. Is there?
I think I can't speak for sure about what that was since this was before my time at the agency, but I'm almost positive that we just looked at the priorities that they said they wanted and not how they came to those priorities. So I think we all know that not every community has as much engagement as Somerville. And so some of these master plans may have very little engagement with the community and community input behind the priorities that they've created. So I think we didn't really delve, that is a really interesting question. I think we have the resources to be able to answer that, but I'm not sure that it's answered in this research.
Well, in preparation for this exercise here in Somerville, I just did personally, I got a couple of the plans from some of the other towns, and I looked specifically at the economic development portions of it. And our study, which was done in 2009, the Economic Trends Report, basically used two-digit NAICS data, and it didn't have in it a market analysis of real estate market trends. Whereas several of the other cities in the region, when they did their economic studies, they did 3 and 4 level NAICS.
Much more detailed.
Much more detailed, and they also had, some had quite elaborate, real estate trend studies sort of attached. So consequently,
conclusions made very different.
We made the same conclusions as everybody else because they were all very similar, but sort of the depth and the quality of the research that went in this was vastly different among them.
Yes.
Would you accept a comment?
Sure, I can pass it along to the person who did this.
No, it's more for us because.
Okay.
Yes. Well, this morning I made in our opening session, I expressed the hope that this time around we can think more systematically than we did the first time around. Where the first time around we focused on specific objectives, didn't think about how they influence each other. Or how they influence our fiscal capacity to meet them. What strikes me, number one is multimodal connection, improved multimodal connection. Number 7 is affordable housing. Here, the most political energy is going into preoccupation with affordable housing. But one of the things that we don't talk about very much is the reason why housing is so unaffordable here is because people who are commuting to jobs in Boston and Cambridge, that we don't have the adequate transportation system so that they could live in more distant communities and still have similar commute times. So, but the further away that you move from that, the less affordable housing becomes an issue. That's why affordable housing is only 7 for this inner core region, while connectivity is number 1. And how do we apply that to the plan that we've got, that we're trying to do right now? Well, one of the things to realize is that the reason why, right now we are housing the workers. Somerville and, Cambridge and Boston have 2 jobs for every worker. We have 2 workers for every, other way around. Yeah. Somerville and Boston have 2 workers for every job. We have 2 jobs, you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Because of, I think, some really bad planning choices in the past, we've invested in housing, which is a net fiscal loss for the city, which also explains, if you wanted to put up another set of statistics there, Somerville, 10% of Somerville's housing stock is subsidized affordable. Boston has 18. Cambridge has 15 and change. And the reason why they can have so much more than we do is because they have so much commercial development revenue that they can invest in affordable housing. So all this focus on, let's build more housing, is actually taking us in the wrong direction. What we need to be building more is commercial development.
I think that's interesting because the priorities that showed up most commonly in these plans seem to reflect some of what you were saying, but still surprising that they don't reflect the context in which the plans are being created, where housing is such a huge issue, regardless of whether or not it's the issue that you should be pursuing. Pardon?
Did you say warehousing?
No, where housing.
Oh, where?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where housing, I don't know. Maybe not the biggest issue. Any other questions about this before we move on? So I'm about to transition into Metro Common, which is our regional plan. And one thing that I want to say about the relevance of this research that I just talked about is that the local plans research was very important to the design of our engagement process for the regional plan. So theoretically, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but theoretically this reflects at least some input from community members. We all know that that's really variable across towns. But this does reflect at least where planning departments are in terms of their conception of what needs to happen in their communities. And so when we were thinking about creating the goals for Metro Common, which I'm going to hand out in a second, we wanted to make sure that we were including not just planners, not just municipal CEOs, not just experts, which we can get some of from that, but we also wanted to make sure that we were including residents who live in the region that we're planning for. Because obviously, without including those, the plan is pretty irrelevant if it doesn't reflect the priorities of people who live in the region. I think the other thing that we've realized, that, well, we knew this, it didn't just come to us as a realization once we started this, but each of these communities, areas, experiences different problems when it comes to planning. And they struggle with different things, they have different priorities. It's obvious that they have different priorities from this. And so we also wanted to create a regional plan that was dynamic and reflected that. So I'm going to move on to Metro Common. And I'm just going to I think I don't need to go into as much depth about this initially up front as we have in the past, but Metro Common is MAPC's regional plan. MAPC is the regional planning agency for the Greater Boston area. And every 10 years we're obligated to create a regional plan by state law. So that makes it sound like we're only doing this because we have to. But similarly to how Somerville is doing SomerVision 2040, not because they have to, but because they want to, MAPC is really committed to using our regional planning process to make sure that the priorities we have as an agency reflect our constituents. So Metro Common 2050 is a 2-year process. I skipped ahead of myself, sorry. So these are sort of the values that MAPC has used to guide our work, and this is really important for understanding how we've approached the regional planning process now. Equity, resilience, prosperity, and stewardship, those are all things that shape how MAPC approaches the work that we do with towns. And so we wanted to make sure that those values were reflected in the regional plan. And then we also are committed to working creatively in partnerships with towns, residents, organizations, local government, state government, all the different players that you could possibly imagine. And also we wanted to make sure that this was data-driven and based on evidence. That we weren't just creating recommendations and goals that were, pulled out of a hat. We wanted to make sure that it was based on real live information that we were getting from people, that we were finding through data, that we were doing through analysis. So here's the timeline. We started this in June 2018. I joined the agency in November 2018. So Metro Common is older than my career at MAPC. We are right now in the transition between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was mostly a visioning phase, and so we were meeting with municipal government, we were meeting with the planning departments to understand where their heads were at, in addition to the local plans research. We also held 5 listening sessions for the general public that we used to engage people who don't necessarily work for the city and aren't able to get in touch with us that way. Those listening sessions were held in 5 places throughout our region. And we've also been doing stuff like this, which we've been calling pop-ups, where we sort of come into an existing conference or an existing meeting, or we table in an event, sort of any opportunity that will give us the chance to meet people who live in the region and ask them for what their vision is for the future. It's a very broad question, obviously, because this region has 3 million people. I pulled that number out of my head. I don't know if that's correct, but it has a lot of people. So we're moving into phase 2, and phase 2 is really taking what we've learned in phase 1, what we've heard from people, what we've heard from planners, what we've heard from experts, and trying to figure out where the opportunities are for working together, where the opportunities are for addressing the issues that people have talked about, and what the challenges are. So this is really where we're starting to look at, can we do what people want us to do? What are the challenges to doing that? What are the opportunities? So in phase 1, we had 5 listening sessions. We met with 15, we had 15 sub-regional breakfasts and lunches, which is almost twice as many as there are regions. 1,500 plus comments. And then we're forming topical committees. Right now we have one called Scenario Creation and one called Community Engagement. And then draft goals for the region, which is what we're going to talk about later. So, based on the information that we've gathered so far and who we've talked to, we've created 5 action areas. And you might notice that they reflect some of the action areas that we identified in the local plans research. In fact, they're almost the same. They might be slightly different in wording. But that is equity of wealth and health, housing for all, inclusive and sustainable growth and mobility, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and dynamic and representative government. So, up next, we're going to sort of be taking on those action areas and looking at what exists already, looking at it's really sort of a systems-based analysis, so we'll be looking at existing trends, systems, policies. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to do the local plans research, so that we could see what existed out there already. And then, like I said, addressing challenges and opportunities. So there is going to be a regional speaker series, which hasn't been planned yet, but it will be on since we're not technically in phase 2, but it will be on our website, and so forth. I'm going to talk about the other 2 parts. So, the goals. I want to pass out our draft goals. Keep in mind that these are very much a draft, so you will probably find some changes that you would like to make to the text, to the wording, to the ideas. That is one of the reasons why we're here today, because if you actually wouldn't mind just passing around. Goals are it's really important for them to be based on, to be relevant to the people who we serve. So right now, the way that they're structured is a high-level statement for a desired future with a narrative description. So you don't have to read through them all now, because we're going to shortly break out into small groups. And it kind of works, so I might have the 2 tables combined together, but it works pretty well to have each table talk amongst themselves. I'll give you some notes to keep track of what you're thinking. You can also write them on the goals themselves. But so, like I said, these goals were crafted from information that we gathered from our local plan review. We're also looking at other comparable regional plans, like the NBTA's plan, whose name I'm completely forgetting, something 2040. Focus 40. So many plan names, I can't keep them all straight in my head. So we're looking at other sort of regional plans like that, and making sure that our plan and the conclusions that we're coming to, the information that we're getting, reflects what has already been said, because we don't want to duplicate things. That's typically inefficient, and we want to make sure that these plans speak to each other, that they work together. You took some of the the 65 goals that we set in Metro Future, and whittled those down, looked at the ones that we struggled with, tried to identify which ones were still relevant to the Boston area of 2018. And then all of the public engagement that we have been doing. So, we're going to break out, but before we do that, does anyone have any quick questions? And I will try to answer them as best I can. Yes?
Broad approach. Is the concept that the regional plan is expected to be a sort of a synthesis and an agglomeration of the municipal plan? certain sort of broad, important regional systemic subject matter, and it's sort of the key.
I think the second part of what you're saying. So our goal with the regional plan is to not only, first and foremost, to access a guide for MAPC, as we are hired by towns and cities in the region to do work with them. The regional plan will guide how we approach that. Some of you may know this, but MAPC actually doesn't have any regulatory power, so we can't force towns and cities to do anything. And so in that regard, having a regional plan is really important for us because it helps us identify what our priorities are and communicate that effectively and efficiently to the communities that we work with. But we also, if the regional plan was coming to conclusions that every community we worked with didn't like, we obviously wouldn't be able to work with them very well. So, to a certain extent, the plan has to work and communicate with the values and priorities of our constituent communities. So, any other questions before we move onwards? Yes.
It seems like in this breakout session and others in general news for the area or for the world, that a lot of the costs we're looking at in the region are happen to be more urban related.
A lot of the what you're looking at?
Costs.
Costs.
Future costs. Future projects
Yeah.
that are going to be necessary. For instance, relative to climate change, sea level rise, that's going to be in the basin here in Charles River and Mystic River, in those communities, and very expensive to deal with. The infrastructure, transit-oriented development, most of the stations are in the metropolitan core, the Metro Mayors Coalition or the inner core. But most Massachusetts, and there's 101 cities and towns in the district, right?
Yeah.
But there's 250 Massachusetts cities and towns that aren't.
Right. Right.
Most of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council district is what we would call suburban.
Yeah. Yes.
Isn't this what we're doing and what we're thinking about is essentially a marketing piece for the legislative leadership, for the voting population of Massachusetts, as to why it's going to be worth investing in core transit and protections relative and things relative to climate change and rising sea level and that sort of thing. Isn't it very much a marketing?
I think that's one way of looking at it. I'm not sure that MAPC has really adopted a particular perspective in that regard. For what I think that we are approaching this as more than just a marketing plan. I do think that that's really an important aspect of this. Like, communities have to be on board with addressing climate change, and so part of MAPC's role is to help provide that information so that communities can make the best choices for themselves. And so in that regard, I think what you're saying is reflected in a lot of the work that what MAPC is doing. Oh, it is reflected in a lot of the work that MAPC is doing. But I also think that that we're not sort of limiting what we're doing to just that perspective, if that makes sense. I think
It's not just about what the communities do in the
Right.
larger context, it's what the larger Commonwealth does in
Right.
terms of a more localized.
so. In addition, I mentioned briefly that we were including other more regional-looking plans into our analysis for this. That includes the regional plans from the other 12 regional planning agencies in Massachusetts. And so, there's 12 other versions of MAPC. They all have to do a regional plan. And that information, even though it's sort of outside of our purview in terms of our community that we're legally, outlined to include, it is really important to, obviously Bolton, which is on the edge of our community, what happens in Bolton affects the next town over, which is outside of MAPC. So I think that we're not really looking at this as just MAPC's region, just sort of like, we're only doing things for MAPC, we're never going to do anything outside of MAPC. And, it's harder for us as an agency to work with towns outside of our area because there isn't as much like, they're already paying their own regional planning agency to work with. So that's where looking at the other regional plans is really relevant for us. But yes, it is a Commonwealth issue. Massachusetts is not that big as a state. I'm from Idaho. Massachusetts, there's 13 Massachusetts that can fit in Idaho. So okay, so any other last questions before we move on to the small group part? Cool. Okay. So this is a very NAPC thing. So I know that maybe you didn't sign up for a small group conversation, but that's what we're going to do. I would love for this table to move back to that table, and for this table maybe to move to that table. And if you could take some time, read through the goals, and then think about which one you're most interested in, and then I'll have you reconvene as small groups to figure out which of the one goal you want to talk about. And you can talk about more than one, just for the sake of time. We've done this, and it's fairly substantive conversations that come out of it, and I want to make sure that you get to have the good conversation and not trying to manage everything.
Chris, when you say that you will want us to talk about a particular goal, what do you want us to talk about?
I'll get to that. I want you to read it first. I don't want to poison the well, so to speak. Well, think about which one you're most interested in, and then as a group, as a small group, you're going to choose the one to talk about. So take 5 minutes, read through the goals, or skim them, or however you want to. Yeah. And if you have questions, feel free to come grab me. I'm just going to get some water. Otherwise, we wouldn't get it. Yeah. Great. Okay, so we have maybe 10 minutes until the end of the session. You are welcome to stay longer. This since I know that everybody likes to talk and has lots to say. So, why don't we reconvene, think about which goal you want to spend the next 10 minutes talking about amongst yourselves, and then, which I know you guys, sounds like you just started to do. When you're thinking about the goal, think about, I know that it's written in sort of an unusual way, it's a little bit of an exposition, sort of more of a narrative than traditional goals. Think about, think about yourself in 2050, or your kids in 2050, or whoever, somebody you care about in 2050. And think about whether or not you think this goal is gonna improve their life. And if you think that it's not, talk about that. If you think that it will, talk about that. If you think maybe, but if we, we're sort of missing something here. Like, what if there's something in the goal that you think could be changed or is a little bit off the mark, talk about that. Run wild.
Should we each say what our favorite is, or what?
How to best SomerVision.
If I can start,
There's something,
they're all important. The one I was
you're talking
looking
about
for was the one that's most relevant to the
all of the session is
the
trying to
regional
place it
scope.
in a broader
I mean, there's one on
context.
neighborhoods here, which is a good goal, but it's
Nearby
it's gonna
town,
be on a small
or the
scale,
state
so
in general,
not that
and
one.
then identify
So I
areas
guess-
where maybe we need to
The
pay
getting
attention
around
to
goal
these more
C seems to
general
me the one
trends.
that's the most clearly,
To understand how,
regional,
so that, like where we kind of made decisions in the past.
scale, if you will.
Community, we have to-
Number A, energy is also a regional one. And,
So that's kind of my criteria for choosing the goal, not choose one.
and the healthy environment. The others either have a strong state
Maybe one where what
leadership,
happens in other towns affects
like
us
the
as
goal
well,
F,
relatively neighboring towns.
is the sort of policy questions that come up under goal F was that the state takes a strong leadership role.
What's part of the most?
So that's how my thinking is going in terms of what we should be.
The way my thinking is going is that,
When you think regional planning, I kind of think
you have to have
space,
economic security and prosperity to pay for every other goal.
transportation,
You can't
floodplain,
build
things that go
infrastructure,
through
transportation without
but then when I see
adequate income and revenue.
the way he puts
You
it,
can't
it's just
achieve health
what goal
without
you
an
want to
equitable
achieve
distribution of wealth.
personally in 20 years with
There's
your
a
loved ones, and to
great
me, like, live fulfilling
Now
life.
dead organizer who
Goal
once
F.
wrote
I mean, that sounds great, but I
false
have no
charity
idea.
constrains the poor to raise
what
their
tools or
trembling
instruments.
hands in
I mean, that sounds
supplication.
like that's goal to me,
True
but
charity
I have
consists
no idea
in
how we
making those
work towards that.
hands that work, and through their work transform their world.
As a regional plan, like, that sounds
that
great.
around and
So, like,
say
my
that I
food
agree
here
with
is
you,
a little
except
different.
I would say the same is true for
And of course,
transportation.
I can see how regional planning would address climate, I could see how that
And
would happen.
easy transportation, you can
But,
make more places economically viable
Yeah,
and
it sounds really great too, but honestly, I just find it
rich in many
depressing
ways, and it's
so
sort of at the base of democracy to be able to provide for
So
But how do you
many
get
people,
there?
I agree with that, but how do you pay for the transportation?
like the chicken and egg.
Well, if you pass on wealth intergenerationally.
Because places with
You're starting
transportation
with
seem
something.
to
The figures for Boston
do
are
better.
median wealth.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Boston
That was
is
my
$1
point
and
earlier
for
in the
white
comment,
Bostonians
in
is
my comment about
$200,000. So,
why is the number, why was the number one
Like, I
located on
don't see how-
transportation?
This also is an issue that is, it's not going to be solved by one community.
And of course, I'll
This is, has to do with
right and say,
federal
I think A
regulation.
is the most important, because if we don't have clean air and water, we're not
I
alive.
agree with you, Rose, which is why I'm most curious about this goal, because it seems the most supreme one, so how does that
So now
work?
we've all agreed on that.
We have one of
We
each.
have nothing in common.
Yeah, well, let me, with respect to all of ours, let me pose the question in terms of the regional, what does the regional structure give the strongest possibility of sort of a useful regional role? It's, on the economic,
So I'm
most
actually coming with like a health
cities
policy
are,
plans and equity ones, but
economic set of questions that usually, from a regional standpoint, come up in terms of the region playing a role in trying to smooth out the competition between the different cities. So it's, it's very destructive if you've got one city in the region poaching its economic development resources from another one, et cetera. So generally, the regional power and regional mechanism is employed to ensure that there's kind
Like
of a sharing
transportation, it's great when improved transportation, but when it's
of balance, et cetera.
we're thinking about.
So that can be,
That's another system.
that's one can be an important way of sort of focusing in on this one.
Like, aren't these meant, it sounds like they're meant to
Yeah,
be provocative.
I'm happy to do that. I'm sorry.
Amenities, the exercise houses are aspiration.
Economics says thank you.
That was what I got my master's in.
Good.
Yeah.
No, but it's,
Is that right? What was your master's in?
economic policy and planning.
Excellent. All right. We got an expert at the table.
Well, I don't say that. Northeastern, I'm not saying that here.
Okay.
No, but you're all right. Good points.
Maybe it's supposed to have a change or.
Such as Boston, such as Cambridge, for instance, that provide.
I mean, back to SomerVision, the ones that seem like it would be clear how to plug in SomerVision and climate change, getting around.
Yeah, I think that the narrative is really helpful actually.
Easily relate that.
It's, I think we chose to
Just
approach it that way because it
not
felt
in
more
terms
appropriate.
of
And actually envisioning.
how to get there, but the shared goals that go into SomerVision.
Right, well, that's right. And I think on the first part, my immediate reaction, like, I'm not sure how we just quite a lot of work.
Sure.
They actually each have sub-projects, which I, in implementation strategies associated with them.
Were you in that panel?
I was,
I went to that, yeah.
and they're like even more draft.
Net zero carbon 2050, yeah, that is a SomerVision.
Yeah, that last sentence that you said, to me, goes to what Steiny said about chicken and egg. And because I think a smarter question is, for us, is that one, meaning, if all of these are important, how do you use one to leverage the other? Where do you
I
begin?
guess my question is
You
this.
know, and at what point do you make a decision that, well, we can transfer people resources for lower
Or that's something that requires.
and then in turn, what kind of decision-making structures, I assume governmental, what, or inter-industrial within the private sector, how does that happen? And MAPC would seem to be the organization that at least would come up with a suggestion for that, while it has no power whatsoever to implement it, but at least to hold up the vision.
It's a common resource that all things can focus on. Communicate with shared ideas.
Yeah.
Is there anything in here that was like, yeah, would enhance what's in
Mayors,
SomerVision?
mayors. Mayors look at some,
I mean, I always feel like the
same
like,
type of thing.
the language about housing of SomerVision is just nowhere near close enough. You know, it's sort of like.
And so I'm gonna bring it back up to environment. One of the reasons this area is now more prosperous is because the Mystic River was cleaned up.
I mean, I appreciate that this is.
I don't think that's true at all.
Wishes that we would really have.
It's an A minus.
I think that has nothing whatsoever to do with that prosperity.
So you're saying that
So,
if it was still
but yeah, in
running
terms of
brown
like
and
turning
red and
people
green,
to-
Are you going back to the 1840s?
no.
Because that's
Civil
true.
action is not the 1800s. Civil action
no.
is the 70s.
No, what I'm saying is that
I
in
mean, maybe one thing is like,
Somerville's biggest industry in the middle
you know,
of the 19th century
the
was
kind of
slaughterhouses.
expansion into the more rural
That
areas.
that wasn't the Mystic, that was going into the
It was
Charles.
the Millis River going into the Charles.
And then the carbon footprint of that
And
development
it
versus
got so
development
ugly
that's
that the state passed legislation requiring the private sector to fill in the river and that became the basis of pretty much all following environmental legislations across the United States, was based on that precedent that set in Somerville.
But the Mystic River was still highly polluted when I moved to Somerville in 1985.
Great, and I think it's wonderful that it's not now, but what I don't understand is how that has to do with economic development.
Okay, so packaging, food scraps, wastewater, unneeded materials are being recycled.
It's easier to live in a
And that's
community
actual
larger
jobs.
community, larger region versus a particular town. Because in a very small area, specific part of one place, but you have a lot of movement, people between towns within a single region, so that how easily accomplish that.
Right, then instead of what you're getting is like, poor people getting
Moved
pushed
out of
farther and farther
Somerville,
out, and
yeah.
still having to, constantly to do more jobs.
Not to say that environment isn't.
So I do just want to note that it is 3:46. So that is technically where we're over. But keep talking. I just want to make sure that you were over.
Connectivity and connecting different communities with jobs and places where people sleep.
Regulate the established
What
law
other
and fix it
economic,
backwards, but you also don't want to
like how do you
make that
create
free for all.
See, I think to me, the regional element
Yes, for me, it's
is largely one of helping us to understand sort of the niche that each community in the zone plays in the overall. And I think
That's why I'm having trouble, like, what are we supposed to do?
if you look sort of market studies at where
Say it's, like making sure that
construction
communities
and
talk to each other, so when they're,
various
to
movement of
preserve everyone
expanding
wants
and
to live in
changing
Somerville, when the reality is that
employers has
cities and towns.
occurred over say a 10-year,
Or there's
15-year
similar
period
resources,
that's
there's
covered
like a
by
wraparound.
2008 to 2018.
To Somerville.
It's not the same throughout the region, obviously. And so,
I think I would
helping
say
us,
something about like
who's
regional
going where and why, in a
restructuring.
sense, is a key set of questions. And for us to get guidance in Somerville as to our planning,
Repository,
you know,
and they make the
we can sort of get up there and say something like, well, biotechnology is the next wave of the future, and this is where the jobs are gonna come, et cetera. Biotechnology is really, breaks down into various categories. It's got the hospitals, the research institutes, it's got the back office kind of operations, the business end of it, it's got the startups, it's got the, so there's a whole sort of, so for us in Somerville, we're not likely to see, major hospitals and research institutions pick up and come here. It's not gonna happen. We're already well established in clusters, et cetera. However, when Partners comes, moves its back office operations here. And, so so our niche in a sense, in that regional industry is a certain set of subset.
So it's basically
Sort of the employment cohort, et cetera. It's not other parts of it.
Actually, our niche could be vast. In fact, the first developments in that space are happening
So now there's like
now.
action out of it.
They're gonna start construction fairly soon in Boynton Yards.
So the recovery is uneven.
And,
Trying to
and on
divert
the P2 block,
levels to
again, it's gonna build labs.
ideally then we're looking at.
But to connect to your question, actually, can you restate it? Because I thought it was important.
well, I was just
But it's
saying.
thinking about how it all, gets out of any of the summer
Where
things
they see
that
and to me, that's
continue
one
to be
of the
developed.
ways
How is that affecting how is that also
developing, and not only connecting, but allow for mixed use of these various
synced up?
That's right.
developments so that it's, right now it's Boston Central, perhaps.
It's online too, so it's like Somerville / food system.
But in order to do that democratically, you need the people's.
Okay, everybody. So I know that we're now at.
The ease of movement.
We've been talking for 15 minutes. I'm gonna guess that we didn't make it very far. 15 minutes was a very aspirational time period. So before you leave, I would just, if one person from your group would be willing to share what you talked about. Yeah.
So we kind of, our question is basically like, what kind of feedback are we supposed to give, given that we feel like these are really aspirational?
Yeah.
So, you know, like, that, yeah, it would be really, yeah, it's, a lot of people are like, that would be really great, but, you know, I don't see it happening in our current political climate, given the constraints that most people think are necessary. So it's hard, so yeah, I just think we mostly discussed not being sure exactly what kind of feedback would be helpful given that.
That is feedback. And that's helpful, yeah. I mean, I think like we don't want to be too pie in the sky about how we're thinking about these things. They have to be actionable at least, a little bit.
But it's clear that they're meant to be provocative, right? I mean, they're very aspirational. And you'd like feedback from us. But then also we talked a lot about the context of SomerVision and how are we supposed to relate that. So we were fumbling around.
Are you supposed to relate SomerVision to the,
Yeah.
yeah.
To these
It's
goals.
kind of, they're sort of parallel processes in the sense that
Yeah.
Metrocommon is the region's SomerVision. So they're supposed to provide similar services to MAPC and the city of Somerville. So in that sense, they're kind of, you know, parallel, and they should be speaking to each other in terms of the goals that they have. That's obviously not, that is in and of itself inspirational, or aspirational, excuse me. Anyone else from your table have any other things you talked about? Yeah.
I mean, it seemed that like what would have been helpful is to get a more clear idea of what are the areas where, so this is kind of a regional group, right? What are the areas where Somerville can work with other towns, maybe neighboring towns or broader region, because they are embarking on similar initiatives that actually kind of cross across town lines.
I heard someone from your group talk about regional communication, I think it was you. That's not reflected a whole lot in these goals, is it? So I think that's definitely feedback that we've heard from other people about what they wish was more part of the goals.
Regional resource sharing as well.
Right. Anyone else from your group have something else to talk about? I also realized that we only had 15 minutes to talk about this. So, in an ideal world, we would have 4 hours, and it would be a conference, and we could have, you know, but yeah.
I'm not sure we get any further than that. Each of us had a different favorite. We had 5 different favorite goals. And so then the conversation became a kind of meta conversation, being if all of these are necessary, how do they interrelate in terms of development? Stani used the chicken and egg question. For example, if you want to create economic development, prosperity, but people need to get to jobs.
Right.
What comes first?
Right.
Where does the money for the infrastructure come from?
Well, you were talking about that earlier, right, with the housing question.
Right, but
yeah.
So one of the things that MAPC maybe could do is to think about, to come up with a vision on what's the path? What needs to come first? How does that create both capacity and financial resources to do the next thing? How do they influence each other? And thinking that through, what are the barriers to that? For example, if every city or town, if their primary source of revenue is going to be property taxes, then inevitably there will be huge inequities in the region.
Right.
So do we need to change our tax policy?
Yes.
For example, just an example.
Right. Any other thoughts from this group?
Yeah, one thought that I was sort of arguing here was the idea of, in effect, the regional perspective. I mean, the goals that are laid out here are all very important, but certain of them are more within the sphere of the region, a regional agency or a regional mechanism. to really articulate, and certainly the transportation one, because, our roads all connect, and the highway, and, I would assume that from the standpoint of the region, when you look at the map at Somerville from up above,
Yeah.
the key role that we have in the region is to ensure that traffic gets in and out of Boston, every morning and every night, as fast and as efficiently as possible. And if in SomerVision we're making policy decisions about land use, et cetera, that are going to somehow hinder or get in the way of the movement of that corridors of transportation, then that's one possible point where the municipal planning and the regional planning are gonna be at loggerheads.
Mm. Yeah. So I think, yes.
Can I build I'm sorry, I never heard of you guys until today.
Okay, yeah.
So is that your role? And we talk about collecting data and seeing trends.
Yeah.
But you guys are the ones that are looking at all these trends and understand, so then do you take what you discovered and said, hey, Somerville, you need to look at this in your planning? I mean, do you have any influence or editorial role?
So,
bringing the towns together for conversation?
yeah, yes, we do. I'm gonna.
Sorry, but it's really basic.
No, that is a question that MAPC still answers. It asks itself every day. So one of the government affairs director at MAPC phrased it this way: we can't force towns and cities to eat their vegetables, but we can give them a healthy menu to choose from.
You can put them in the same room.
Right, and we can get them to talk to each other. Okay. So that is really how we look at our role as people who are primarily focused on persuasion. That's really how we get things accomplished, is by because we don't have power to force towns and cities. We can't go to Somerville and say, hey, you need to do this. You have to, or we'll take away your money or fine you. Right.
Did you think of this?
Exactly. So in a lot of the ways in which we work with cities and towns is when they hire us to do a plan, like a master plan or something like that. We go in with this perspective. We go in with our regional plan perspective that we've spent years creating. We go in with our commitment to equity, and we say, if you're thinking about open spaces, you should also really be thinking about X, Y, Z. You should really also be thinking about 1, 2, 3. And that's really the way in which we get sort of our priorities accomplished. And it can be really hard. There are some cities and towns in our region who just don't want to work with us. And there's not really anything we can do about that. If they don't hire us, they don't hire us. But we can sort of nudge them in the right direction whenever we get the chance. So, yeah. I mean, it makes it sound a little bit more depressing than it actually is. But well, I want to thank you guys all for coming. I hope that the conversation was substantive. I hope that it was interesting. If you have questions, this is my contact information. I realized I forgot to bring my cards, and I didn't have a slide, so I just wrote that real quick. And then metrocommon.mapc.org is the Metrocommon website, and that's where the local plans research that I presented earlier is going to be when it is put onto the
So thanks, Christian, for coming out to Somerville today, and thank you all for taking the time out of your day to think a little bit bigger picture regionally. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you're not able to return tomorrow morning for the second day of the session, please leave your name tag at the registration desk. If you are going to be returning tomorrow morning, don't forget your name tag in your folder when you come back. The program starts at 9 a.m. just like it did today, and we'll have a similar breakfast spread out starting around 8:30. So hope to see you tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
You can use it tomorrow.
Okay. In New York. Okay. Yeah.
Never turned down.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of all the other regional planning agencies
It's better than I would have thought for myself.
are also being but MAPC is the only one that's not MAPC. So our transportation department focuses almost exclusively on parking studies, multimodal transportation and transit.
Well, I wasn't, I can't
Yeah,
do
so we really don't do any highway studies or anything like that. No, that's all the
in
Boston.
public,
Okay.
because they will, they're down the front of my shirt.
Stuff to do a little bit more
So I
exciting.
used, so instead,
We don't have to spend
yes.
all our time.
I'm very good at that.
Bill enjoyed your comments.
Yeah.
I will be here tomorrow.
Ours.
God bless you.
You look familiar too.
Were you once on the design review committee?
Which design review committee, Somerville
Yeah.
or state?
No, it was so,
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Her face is haunting me.
But I recognize you too, so.
Okay.
I recognize you too, and we'll figure it out.
But maybe because for the last 15 years I've been in column in the Somerville Times, and they always show my ugly face on here.
Probably.
Are you from Eastern Europe?
I am.
Whereabouts?
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria. Okay. It's the last name kind of gave it away.
Yeah. Immigrants. When I was 11.
Well, God bless. You're richer for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope.
Thank you for coming. It sounds like something's going on over there.
Christian, thank you very much.
Oh yes, of course, thank you.
I was wondering, what is your relationship to the PTA?
Yeah, so I was just talking about this, but most of the regional planning agencies in Massachusetts are also the transportation, like the highway. They like distribute the highway money. But MAPC actually doesn't. So we are, in the Boston region, it's separated. And so most of our transportation work is about transit planning, multimodal planning, and parking studies. So we do a lot of work with the MBTA, but because there's, I'm not entirely sure. So I am starting work on a project with the MBTA for the West Station that's going in I don't know exactly where it's going, Alston, somewhere? In the Alston yard. It's going in where there's all that huge train yard development. We did some stuff in the early phases of the Green Line when we worked with the MBTA, and the MBTA can hire us to do plans for them. But I don't know I'm not entirely sure how often we work with them, and I don't know exactly what our roles are when we work together. I do know that MAPC, yeah, they have their own planning department. They don't typically hire us to do station plans or anything like that, or transit expansion projects or anything like that.
Who's looking, I feel like transit is such an important part.
Yes.
Thing of the agenda.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think that it is a huge priority for MAPC, but we're not really the agency that's responsible for it, or has the. And so it puts us in an interesting, so it puts us in a really interesting area where we have a lot of priorities when it comes to transit expansion. But we're not in a position where we can really implement a whole lot or influence very much. I think we have a pretty decent relationship with the MBTA. And we work with them pretty regularly, but I just am not sure exactly what that is like. So, yeah.
This is very informative.
Oh, I'm glad. I spent most of the time talking. It felt a little bad. We usually try to do a little bit more interaction than that, but
Thank you.
I'm glad you came. Thanks.